Nicole Marson from Microsoft. Welcome to the next instalment of Microsoft's Public Safety and Justice Solutions Seminar Series. Today, we are pleased to be hosting our partner Comtrac, who will be presenting their evidence and brief management solution. Comtrac replaces manual and timely consuming evidence and brief management methodologies, dramatically reducing the investigation timeframes and streamlining the criminal and administrative justice proceedings through a digital methodology they call elementizing evidence. Today, we are joined by Craig Doran, the CEO and co-founder of Comtrac, with special guests that I will let him introduce to you. Craig, thank you for your time. Looking forward to learning more. Over to you.
All right, thanks, Nicole. Thanks again for the opportunity. As Nicole mentioned, we've got Gary Hall from the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment with us today, and we've also got Jason Goose from the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, who are going to sort of jump in a bit later on and have a bit of chat about their experience. We found that instead of me just getting on our soapbox about how good our product is, it's much easier and probably better to come from some of our client base. So I'll let Gary and Jason just quickly introduce themselves, and then I'll kick off the presentation and give you a look at the problem we're trying to solve in streamlining the criminal justice process. Over to you, Gary. Just a quick intro.
Thanks, Craig. Yes, as Craig said, I'm Gary Hall from the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. I'm the Director of Environmental Crime, and in very short précis, we look after all CITES wildlife investigations, hazardous waste and fraud matters, predominantly looking at a international organised crime element. Thanks, Craig.
Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Jason Googe. I've been with the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator for the last 3 years, involved in standing up the investigations unit in our statutory compliance area, and we deal with the top offending under the national law in all jurisdictions other than WA and Northern Territory around Australia. Yeah, thanks, Craig. Happy to jump in later.
All right, thanks for that. So just a bit of background about myself. As Nicole mentioned, I'm the CEO of Comtrac, but what we've developed has come from, I had 22 years with the Queensland Police Service, and during that I was dabbling in creating a electronic brief of evidence in those days. And what I want to talk about is the solution we've created, but more importantly, how it's been designed to specifically streamline the actual criminal justice process from end to end. So I've just got a couple of slides to show you before I show you the software. So we'll just jump straight into it. So when we talk about the criminal justice process, most of you looking at this would recognise it. There's obviously the investigation which occurs, commencement of proceedings, whether it's from arrest or a summons. There's a variety of court mention dates that'll occur, trying to schedule when a committal should be set and how long that should be for. Then post that, generally there's the completion of the brief of evidence and getting preparation for those committal proceedings, the delivery of that brief in due course prior to those committal proceedings, which from a lot of us, and certainly my own experience, often happens in the week leading up to, or even days leading before it. And then, of course, the actual trial itself. Now, when we talk about how to streamline the criminal justice process, most people from, especially law enforcement agencies, would at some stage been exposed to some sort of a review of the criminal justice process. And it's always come down to how we can streamline it. Now, the biggest problem with streamlining is that the brief of evidence is often not delivered until the last minute, and the various parties along the criminal justice process, be it prosecutors, brief checkers, legal reps, and even defence, generally don't have access to even a partial brief to make decisions on when to schedule the committal and how long it's going to take. Now, there has been quite a number of reviews undertaken in a lot of states. For example, in Queensland, there was the Moynihan review, a review into the civil and criminal justice process. There's more recently that there was the Butler review, but most of the reviews in every state have come up with these three key findings: that if you're going to streamline the criminal justice process, there needs to be the starting of the brief evidence from the commencement of the investigation. Prosecutors and legal reps should be able to read and consider both partial and full briefs at the earliest opportunity, so they can make critical decisions about when and how long matters should go for, and that evidentiary material should be fast-tracked to all the legal reps through a digital mean, whether it's electronically or even just sharing a PDF version of the brief. So what we're going to be having a look at is showing that Comtrac is an evidence and brief management application that sits within the entire criminal justice process, which starts as soon as the investigation starts. The investigators can upload exhibits and map evidence to the points they're trying to prove, which means at the time of arrest or summons, there should at least be a prima facie case inside that brief of evidence, and it becomes accessible to all the various parties along the way, whether it's at first court mention, second court mention, or leading up to the committal proceedings. And even whilst the investigator continues to complete the brief of evidence, then that brief of evidence can be shared and can be accessed and can be read by the various parties that need to get access to it at an earlier opportunity than the last minute just coming up to the actual committal proceedings. So that's what we're going to be showing, is how we've provided that solution to streamline the criminal justice process by creating a digital evidence and brief management application. So we're going to jump straight into the application and show it to you now. We're just going to show you the key bits about how it streamlines the whole process. So I'll just open that up, and Nicole, I'll just get you to confirm that you can see our application there in the middle.
All good, thanks, Craig.
Okay, so what Comtrac does, and this is really key, is that right from the very start of the investigation, it is building a brief of evidence as the investigation progresses. And what that means is, as the investigator moves through their investigative activities, obtains exhibits and maps the evidence to the elements of the offence under investigation, then this brief of evidence is being built as they go through the investigation, which means it's accessible and can be viewed at any time when the agency decides to share it with those third-party stakeholders like prosecutors, legal reps, defence, and the DPP if required. So we're going to show you how the brief evidence is formed first, and then we're going to show you the different ways that this brief can actually be shared. So I'll just go back to my main screen here. So the way this brief is built as it progresses is that as the investigator moves through the investigation, they will record a summary of their investigative activities into the running sheet. Now, once they've done that, if they've taken possession of any exhibits or files during those investigative activities, then they will come into the exhibit register and they will upload those exhibits into the exhibit register itself. And once they are uploaded, at any point during the investigation, the investigator or the brief checker can jump in and have a look at the exhibit, and they can actually see that document in line without having to request a hard copy or get it emailed from the investigator. And the next step is that once they've obtained exhibits, they go to the investigation matrix, and this is the heart and soul of Comtrac. What the investigation matrix has, it lists the offences that are currently under investigation. And if we click on one of those, it says these are the elements that we've set out to prove during this investigation. And then when the investigator obtains exhibits, all they do, if they believe there is evidence in an exhibit that goes towards proving an element, they simply drag that exhibit across to the element they believe it goes towards proving. They'll just describe in here what is the evidence from this exhibit that goes towards proving this element, and then they'll save it. So what we're doing, almost like a jigsaw puzzle that can be viewed at any stage, the investigators are basically mapping evidence against the elements to determine whether they've proven or established that point of proof or that element during the investigation. What this does, by having this view and this process of mapping evidence, it allows at any time during the investigation, the investigator or a brief checker or even a prosecutor can jump into the evidence matrix. They can look at any one of the offences that are in investigation. They can see which ones the investigators nominated that they believe that they have substantiated. They can open up that element. They can then review the summary of evidence they believe has gone to actually proving it, and then they can even open up any of those exhibits within the evidence matrix and review it and then download it as need be. So the key thing is providing transparency around the brief of evidence, whether it's completed or partial, at all points during the investigation. Now, if it's a more complex matter and it's not just about showing just how we've proven the elements of the offence, many briefs will require something like an event chronology. The investigator, once again, can create this event chronology, and keep in mind this also gets imported into the brief of evidence. And at any point during, again, the investigator prosecutors or other legal reps, if they're granted access to the brief, can basically open up that particular event and see the exhibits that obtained so far that go towards proving it. So that's basically how it's as simple as that for the investigator. We're not trying to change investigative workflows or change the culture of how they do investigations. Investigators now will record somewhere their investigative activities. They will record somewhere the exhibits they took possession of. All we're doing is giving them a platform where they can then map the evidence against the elements of the offence as they progress through the investigation. And what that is doing, it is automatically in the background building this brief of evidence that we quickly looked at before as the investigation progresses. So at any point in time, we've got access to a partial brief. So we're going to look at the different styles of the brief that it actually exports. Now, one key thing about Comtrac, it was designed to export the brief in a digital format with like a HTML format package, but it also allows you to export it into a PDF version as well. Because although the courts are going through that process of moving to electronic and digital briefs, there is still a need for a hard copy PDF to be produced. And the third way we can actually share that brief electronically through a secure public-facing portal, which we can register a legal rep or a prosecutor have access to, and they can access the digital and the PDF through that as well. So let's go and have a look at these two different styles. So if we look at the HTML brief, and here we see this is inside the brief of evidence. So I can go into here, I can access all of my exhibits. I can open up any of the exhibits that are currently in it. I can look at the evidence matrix and see how we've actually proven that element of the offence. I can open up exhibits within the HTML brief. For example, I can open up and quickly look at a statement and download it if I want to get a hard copy of it. I can open up any video footages, audio files that are contained within the brief of evidence, and any other records. So the record could be a Word document, it could be Excel, any type of document is visible within the digital brief of evidence. Records of interviews, videos, and so forth, again, all accessible through the actual brief of evidence. So the HTML gives an interactive platform which we can share with any of the third-party stakeholders, and as the investigation progresses, once again, what's contained in this will grow as it goes along as well. So as I mentioned before, the second way we can share a brief of evidence is through a PDF version. So that what the PDF version is, it just takes the digital brief and it turns it into a fully indexed PDF brief evidence, which we can print up. So it's automatically creating things like table of contents. Even though it's meant to be printed, you can see there are hyperlinks through it, or I can jump to different parts of the brief. The content in the PDF brief is exactly the same as in the digital brief. It'll have the alleged parties, the allegations subject to this brief, the witnesses, all the exhibits that those witnesses are producing. What's key to this, the list of exhibits that are assigned to this witness, these are the ones, if an exhibit gets mapped to an element of the offence, then the system knows that exhibit is now relevant and it knows who it came from and it produces it in this list. So we've got our exhibit list where the exhibits are again categorised under the type of exhibit. We have our evidence matrix where we show how we believe we substantiate and prove the elements of the offence. Our event chronology is brought in the PDF brief of evidence. Warrants and notices and the exhibits that it sees by virtue of those notices. Although we don't have time to go through it, when you upload an exhibit, you can link it to a warrant so the prosecutor knows where those exhibits have been obtained from. And other areas like you can add a digital signature as well. All the exhibits are included into the brief of evidence. So if I click on Craig Duran, I can see that there's all the exhibits that are produced by Craig. Every exhibit is given a cover sheet automatically showing where it was obtained from, when it was obtained, and who produces it, how many pages are in the exhibit, and the cover sheet, what follows that is the actual exhibit itself. So all your other exhibits you took possession of are converted to PDF when the brief is exported. Where it's something that can't be converted, like a record of interview, it'll just still create a cover sheet, but it'll actually put a statement in there saying this is a video file, it can't be extracted. So we know that there is another exhibit associated with that. So that's the second way we can share the brief of evidence. The third way we briefly mentioned is that we can actually just share it through what we call a secure public-facing portal. what this does, this allows me to type in a prosecutor's name, or even if you want to share it with the defence counsel, their email address. And when I hit share, that registers the email with Comtrac, and the end user will get a link in an email. And what that does, that link will bring them to this public-facing portal where they'll be firstly required to sign up, and there's a two-step verification process of that as well. Then every time they log in, they'll be sent a verification email again, just to have that two-factor identification in there. And I'll just grab mine that hopefully was sent to me. There we go. Copy that. Log in. Oh, go back to the portal. So they can actually log into there, put their verification code, and then they'll be access the portal that's been signed to them. So you can see in this case, assuming this is a prosecutor, I've given them access to the digital brief of evidence, and I can click on that, and that will simply open up and the digital brief, which will have all the same functionality that we have within Comtrac, where they can open up documents, play videos, etc. Just go back to that, so we can share it from that. Keeping in mind that you still have control to turn off share if you want to remove a brief of evidence, you don't want to share with an individual, maybe you've updated or replaced it, you can do that. You can see that I've also shared the PDF copy with the prosecutor as well, where they can link to it. They can also send me comments about the brief in case they want anything else. The prosecutors can interact with the investigators by creating like a request for more information if need be. And again, they're able to do this in the earlier stages because they've got delivered at least a partial or prima facie brief evidence while the rest of the brief is being created. So when they interact with the investigator, basically what happens, the investigator gets an email saying that the prosecutor has sent you a requisition order for something else, and where that appears, they'll get an email, and that actually will appear in the evidence and brief management task manager area. And we're not going to go into this too much because we are focusing on the brief, but you can see here's the requisition that we got from the prosecutor amongst all my other tasks, and I can action that just by dragging and dropping it, put my results in, add attachments to it, and so forth. I think one of the key things here is if the prosecutor asks us for another exhibit, and when we obtain it and when we map the evidence to the elements of the offence, it's automatically going to update our brief of evidence, and we don't have to go and produce another copy and resend it to the prosecutor. So there are lots of other areas in Comtrac which I'm not going to go into, because the key part of this presentation is about how we streamline the criminal justice process. And once again, as I mentioned before, the key area in streamlining the investigation process is having a evidence and brief management platform that can be accessed through all stages of that criminal justice process. So by having the partial brief created, even with just a prima facie case, the key decisions that are made along the way can be made quicker and with more confidence. For example, just how much time do we need to set for the committal proceedings? How far away is the brief of evidence? The brief can be delivered to the stakeholders like the prosecutor, defence, or anyone else that we need to get it to, just simply by pressing a button and giving them a link to be able to access that investigation. So that was the main purpose of what Comtrac was about. There are lots of other features that we've got, like it even produces like investigative statements automatically. That'll just capture the investigative activities from the running sheet, the exhibits they take possession of, and complete a draft affidavit of everything they've done during the investigation, which they can just review, tidy up, sign, and then upload into the brief of evidence as required. So that's Comtrac. I hope that's given you a bit of a core overview of what we're trying to achieve. And again, we're not trying to solve all the problems of the world around case management, but the key area where there is a big gap is streamlining the criminal and justice process by making sure the brief of evidence can be shared early, there is access to all the relevant parties when they need to access that material, and it can be delivered, it can be fast-tracked to the actual the end stakeholders. So I'll probably just hand over to Gary just to give us a bit of a feedback on his experience of the concept of elementising evidence that we've delivered to their agency.
Thanks, Craig. So yeah, I'll probably quickly touch on a couple of things Craig's mentioned, and one of the big ones for us is how it actually meets the current processes and methodologies of how we work with the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions, which is a lot different than state law enforcement. From a Commonwealth perspective, my investigators and my area is tasked to produce a brief of evidence to give to the DPP so they can decide whether or not a prima facie case exists. So rather than from a state perspective, we actually have to produce the brief of evidence a lot sooner, and then the Commonwealth Prosecution Service then decides whether or not the Commonwealth is going to run with the matter. Now, historically, that meant that an agency would run a protracted investigation over a long period of time, relying on, the investigator's experience. And, 20 years ago, it used to be, where's the indictment handbook? What are we looking at, the elements of the events? 6 to 12 months down an investigation, the senior investigator finally drags out the evidence matrix and tries to join all the dots together. From the elementised offence side of things, where it's looking at the evidence against the offences straight away, that's removed from, that process is being done in the background, So we've found this digital format of when it's elementised, you can have a very experienced investigator running with matter, and they're using their experience just to do what they've normally done, and they'll put it in the system. But also with junior investigators, the system itself is guiding them through the investigation. They are looking at what it's sort of telling them what evidence they need to go out and get. So it's user friendly from both sides, but our links to the DPP is probably the biggest thing. As I said before, we would work for months, if not years, on investigations. We would give a brief of evidence to the CWP, they would review it, and the prosecutor would have a different slant or want different piece of evidence, and it would come back, and you would have to pretty much start all over again. Now, luckily, with a lot of work between the Commonwealth agencies and the CWP, pre-brief advice has changed, and this is probably where I see the biggest benefit with the digitised brief format and the way we're currently working with CWP, is that we now engage the prosecution service at the commencement of an investigation, not at the dissemination of the brief. So we can now then allow the DPP or the senior prosecutor to look at our cases that's going along, and they can then make a comment, as Craig, you said before, they can task to say, okay, well, they need this piece of evidence, or they need that person approached, especially from a hazardous waste space from the Commonwealth, because it is very scientifically based. And every single investigation has a slightly different slant of what evidence is required to meet the proof of the offence. So we need that engagement from the prosecution service straight away. And it's that to and fro, being able to, from a digital format, and be able to get instantaneous feedback from the prosecution service, even before, from a Commonwealth perspective, an indictment's even, charges are even laid.
Yeah.
So we're already there. The only other thing I'd probably touch on before we get to Jason is where I see it from my perspective as an investigations manager is my ability to QAR jobs. I can look at a case being run, and I can look at the elementised things in the system and say, has this element of this offence been met, yes or no? And I can clearly see it. And if it isn't, the brief can't go, and the brief won't be disseminated. The quality assurance process is an awful lot quicker. So regardless of, we're looking at maybe 50% plus time savings on the preparation of the brief. Just the QAR side, from my perspective as a senior manager, is, vastly improved.
Yeah.
I could go on, but, for me, it's sort of like going back to the future. We look at, as I said, 25 years ago, I think every detective was given the indictment handbook and say, this is what you need to work under. You don't need that anymore because the digitised system's doing it for you.
Yeah. So that's a really good point you raised about the DPP being involved, Commonwealth DPP involved at earlier stage of the investigation. Because if you look back at, like I mentioned before, is all those reviews into state-based criminal justice processes, they're all basically saying the same thing, is that, the brief needs to be commenced from the start, and the prosecutors and legal reps, they need to be accessed and involved in brief at the earliest opportunity, so they can. One of the key things I remember from, I think it was the Moynihan reviews, is about it allows them to undertake pre-conference trials with defence to try and negotiate, to streamline those proceedings. But if they don't have the brief at the early stage, then they just can't have those conferences. So it's interesting how those reviews at state-based law enforcement are focused on exactly what the Commonwealth DPP are doing with agencies like yours.
Yeah.
I'll hand over to you, Jace. Gary's always a hard act to follow.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I was just going to say thanks, Gary, for stealing my thunder. But we obviously have some of the same issues, being regulators. I suppose what's really different for the agency that I come from is that we are not Commonwealth-based. We're a state-based regulator that works on a national level. Our legislation is very complex, and it is quite unique in a way that it is adopted by each of the other states or territories. And that being the case, it means that we need to produce briefs of evidence in different jurisdictions in a different way, depending on the criminal practice rules of each state. So that's quite unique for us. And what Comtrac has allowed us to do is basically build a brief of evidence representative of what is required in each jurisdiction. So that for us has been a huge advantage. Back to about 3 years ago, I was involved at the end of the procurement process for Comtrac as a case management system. And one of the things that the NHVR were contemplating was, again, similar to AWE, was the need to have consistent, unbiased investigations. And that was around a very complex safety legislation and changes that we had in our law back in 2018, which basically brought about issues around different corporations law and the need to simply have a system that really spelt everything out for us because of how complex these charges were and are. We're still going through that process. So being able to elementize the offences was just a huge advantage for us, and to see that built into the CMS system as it was and how it stood as Comtrac has been a massive plus for us as well. The only other thing I could probably think of that hasn't been touched on is simply just the sheer size of briefs of evidence these days. The size of our briefs of evidence, including the digital evidence that goes into them, the data that we capture from GPS systems, your record of interviews through to all your digital data. The briefs of evidence have just exploded in size. So it's become nearly impractical to be able to get a brief like that before a court in a hard copy. So to me, in my opinion, is obviously that moving forward, that the only way to go is digital to keep up with the ever-moving technical space that is digital data. So that's been a huge advantage, and being able to share the stuff through the portal and the other task management systems built within Comtrac has been a huge advantage as well. And we actually have been through a number of briefs of evidence and charges that are before the court, having used this case management system. And the prosecutors, again, have been involved in the process of, I suppose, collaborating with us and making sure that the evidence is presented in that matrix, in that evidence matrix, at the earliest possible stage so that everybody understands it. So the group brainstorming around that, again, has been something that probably didn't do many years ago in the police. You just went with what you knew best, and you threw the charge up before the court. But now there seems to be a lot more collaboration, and to be able to do that with, even very recently as yesterday, to be able to speak with barristers and prosecutors about the charges that we're about to put before a court has been really worthwhile. Thanks, Craig.
All right. Yeah, no, you're right. The brief servants are getting massive. That's probably one of the benefits we don't mention too often, is how we're preventing our prosecutors' defence from pulling their backs out, pushing those trolleys with those A4 ring binders around the streets.
Absolutely.
So yeah, look, and it's quite interesting the fact you got different jurisdictions, different states, Jason, and you're quite right. The brief, the way it needs to look, is completely configurable. Yeah, for any jurisdiction, where it's state-based, Commonwealth, or even overseas, and that's one of the key reasons it's been designed there. But I think it's interesting that we've got like law enforcement agencies, environmental regulators, work health safety, like ACCC, ATO, all these different agencies that have all different types of investigations, but the solution seems to fit all those different environments. No one has ever asked us to change the work process of building the brief. It all just seems to be a nice fit for most of them. So that's probably it from us, I guess. Not sure where we're going with time and so forth, but I'll hand over to you, Nicole, if you wanted to wrap that up for us.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Craig, and to special guests as well, Jason and Gary, for sharing their stories and their engagements and experiences with Comtrac as well. Look, if you have any questions or want to know further information around Comtrac solution, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Craig Doran, and we can make the appropriate introductions or answer any questions that you may have. Wanted to thank everyone for their time today, and look forward to our next session, which we will be holding in a couple of weeks around the tactical command vehicle. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody. Stay well and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.